What I'm going to say today may not be popular. I do not advocate breaking the glass ceiling for its own end, not just for the end of equality. Because if we only discuss change, if we only champion ideals, but we do not deal with the nitty-gritty, if we do not deal with the expense, the practicalities of actually affecting it, then nothing's going to happen. Let's be absolutely clear. The class ceiling does exist. It exists, as we know, as we look around our law firms, because we see a huge proliferation of individuals who have attended private schools. And yet the majority of the UK did not. The majority of the UK, 93% in fact, attended state schools. So the class ceiling is not a minority issue. It's about the exclusion of the majority. Now, I'm not suggesting that law firms and chambers can't operate perfectly well without these individuals. And nor am I suggesting that the legal profession is morally obligated somehow to employ everybody. But there certainly are good and compelling reasons as to why the class ceiling should be broken. So whilst equality and fairness are the legitimate aims of any democratic society, I wish to submit to you today the business case for breaking the class ceiling and the reasons that the legal profession can actually get something positive itself back from doing so. Now, without meaning to sound obtuse, I wish to take you at the beginning to the end. I want to begin at the entry-level question, which isn't actually the beginning itself, because for the majority of people, it is the end of a long series of stages that reinforce the class ceiling, because the majority of people never get to interview, because the majority of people don't make it through the application process, and the majority of people will find law school fees exorbitant, may struggle with the cost of university, and there are those who will not reach their potential, who will never make it to the grades they need, and some, in fact 7 in 8 of low-income families, who never even aspire to entering the professions at all, so they feel marginalised from the outset. What I intend to do today is to show you a number of cost-effective and commercially viable proposals which would begin to solve this journey by shaking the class ceiling, at its very foundations. But I said that what I would say today wouldn't be popular. And the reason is because I intend to deal with the big elephant in the room that nobody wants to look at. With the big elephant that Alan Milburn ignored in the final report of the panel of the Fair Access to the Professions, when he said that his reforms were cost neutral. Now, there is no way that you could begin to deal with breaking this problem with the energy and the time and even administration costs of going about breaking the class ceiling without there being a cost. Now, social mobility certainly will have a price tag. And the big elephant we have to look at is who's going to pay and how much of the price tag should this legal profession be willing to pick up and pay for. So let's begin with the reasons, with the business case, and work out why the legal profession should put its hand in its pocket at all. So I've said to you that equality may well be a decent aim, but let's have the 4 reasons that exist as to why the legal profession itself can benefit. The first of these is that no matter which way you look at it, it can't make sense to look at such a tiny minority of the population, the 7% that attend independent schools, as being somehow the biggest pool of talent that you're going to require. If you want a bigger pool of talent, you need to unlock the 93% of state school students and make those part of your target candidates. The second thing is, if you consider the difficulty and the strife that somebody from a very low-income family will have to go through to get their way to good grades and to get themselves into decent universities and to pay for those law school fees, you may well find that those are the most committed pupils, the most committed trainees that you ever have. Thirdly, we're told that the market, the UK economy, is going to evolve, that it is going to become more service-based. So what will in fact happen to the legal profession is that the client base itself will diversify. It will become so that there are more people from more diverse backgrounds in commerce itself, and those will be the needs you need to meet. As the legal profession is predominantly about relationships and about trusting your advisor, one of the key things that law firms and chambers are going to have to deal with is having an artillery of diverse solicitors, an artillery of diverse barristers, so that you can deploy them and meet the needs of your clients, or you may well lose the battle for business.
Is there any evidence for that, though? I mean, it's obviously very attractive. I mean, far from being unpopular, this is all music to my politically correct ears. But is there actually any evidence for the proposition that a diverse client base is seeking a diverse legal profession? Because, you know, multinationals employ staff from all over the world. They don't seem desperately bothered at the moment, do they, by the state of our law firms?
Well, I think this is exactly what I'm saying, is that it is going to be a problem more for the future as the client base becomes more diverse. I mean, at the moment, if you're in a law firm that's dealing with corporate and big commercial clients, you may often be dealing with people who are also middle class, people who are also upper class and are in the professions themselves. They already sort of fit that meet. What I'm suggesting is that the legal profession isn't behind the curve, so that when that corporate and commercial client diversifies, that's the point at which it would be very useful for the legal client, the legal provision to diversify as well.
Test that proposition a little bit further.
Mm-hmm.
If I am a criminal client, for example, moving out of the city, I'm a criminal client, or I am a social welfare client, I'm homeless and I'm trying to get a home and I need to sue the local authority, I'm a criminal defendant. I'm actually not looking for somebody like me.
No.
I'm looking for somebody who I see as more powerful, more privileged and more articulate than me. So can you actually evidence in any way your proposition that lawyers need to reflect their client base?
I think the very nature of choosing your lawyer does come down to, yes, respecting them, and yes, having sort of a just majesty of the law and fearing that. But at the end of the day, if you're taking advice from somebody, you're going to want to take advice from someone that you do feel understands your situation. And I think that's really what it comes down to. I don't think there's any hard facts on it. It's more that when you're trying to take advice from somebody, if you feel they've completely missed the point, then that's going to be very difficult. And when you have, in the corporate setting or in criminal setting, you do have a choice with your legal providers. And I think that's something that the legal profession is having to come to terms with, is that actually now clients, there's an awful lot of firms out there offering both criminal and corporate elements. And, you know, the power is with the consumer at the moment to choose who they want. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thanks.
Thank you. Sorry, so as I've said, there's this third element where we're dealing with this changing market and having a diverse workforce. The other positive bonus, of course, of having a diverse workforce is that it's very good for your business profile. In the same way that you'd want to say we're equal opportunities in terms of we employ black and white, gay and straight, male and female, able-bodied and disabled bodies, we also employ rich and poor equally. And if you wanted to make that more outwardly visible, you could do something like using kite marks or some sort of accreditation mark, or even having a business case set up on your website showing, look, here's one of the ones that we have recruited and look how well this has gone. So that's just a number of suggestions there. But I said that I wanted to take you to the end, to look at the journey of the, as it would be, sort of excluded candidate. So if we go straight to the application process and to the interview, there's obviously a great danger that a recruiter can be blinded by the very honed soft skills of an individual who's grown up in an advantaged social milieu. I think that is a problem which is being tackled, and it is more of a minority issue at the moment, because, as I say, the majority of people from low-income backgrounds perhaps are falling at the first hurdle, at the application process itself. And the reason that this class ceiling exists, for the most part, is something quite innocent. It's not desperately sinister. It's about better grades in private schools. So when you're receiving 2,000 applicants for a job, 2,000 applications for a job, you can't possibly interview all of them. That wouldn't be cost effective. That wouldn't be commercially viable. So if you're going to interview them, if you're going to find a way of narrowing your interviewing pool, at the moment, law firms or chambers would think of sifting on grades. You're going to look for the best candidate as you can on paper. But the problem with this, as we know from the research of the Sutton Trust, is that grades are hugely influenced by socioeconomic background. So if you are an intelligent student at a state school, you are likely to receive half a grade lower on every single GCSE you take than a similarly intelligent, privately educated counterpart. And the same again, if you're from a low-income background, you're in a disadvantaged area, you're 10 times less likely to go to an elite university than someone from an advantaged area. So what we're talking about here is an inherent and indirect discrimination in the way that candidates are chosen to be called for interview. But obviously, law firms and chambers must have a way, a commercially viable way, of choosing their candidates. They can't invite everyone to interview. So how do we get to the real innate talent? How do we get to the individual behind the education? Well, what we could do is we could look at changing the way that we have our sort of basic criteria, our minimum academic requirement. And instead of being based on grades, we could use some sort of online IQ testing or online skills set testing. Now that's obviously going to have an implementation cost, but once you've put it in, not only does that help tackle discrimination, but you've also then got a universal metric from which to compare all your students. Similarly, chambers could offer a similar process with IQ testing or something really progressive like an advocacy competition, for instance. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to get away from grades and looking at something that isn't massively influenced by socio and economic factors. So let's continue with that journey, and we'll go back a stage, those people who never got to applications because they couldn't afford what seems to be quite exorbitant law school fees. Now, if we're going to think about commercially viable ways of tackling this, do we say, you know what, law school fees don't seem to be in line with some other postgraduate courses, let's cut them? Well, I don't think that is going to work because, for one, law schools are commercial outfits. They aren't like universities, they are trying to make money. Secondly, I would imagine there is enormous cost in employing people who used to be barristers and solicitors and having a substantial salary to keep them. So that might not be the way forward. And the alternative is we plough more money out there. We make more sponsorship for LPC or BVC. And I certainly think that's somewhere where chambers could look to improve. But if we're going to do it in a cost-effective, in a commercially viable way, without ending up spending more and more and more, what we could do is something very, very simple. And that simple thing we can do is to look at cash flow. Instead of giving more money or cutting fees or spending extra on getting these students in, we spend the same amount of money, but we get it to them earlier. Just this morning, we heard that the CBI is having all sorts of comments about how there shouldn't be a cap on university fees. And we heard yesterday from the Lib Dems that freedom of university, free cost for everybody, is not going to be something they can offer anymore. Everybody's going to have to pay for university, and the fees are going to get more expensive. So what I propose is that we have the same amount in our training contracts, the same amount of sponsorship, the same end figure. But what we do is, instead of having it all backloaded, is we take it forwards and we say, you know what, we're going to sponsor you at 18. We're going to get you through university by giving you the money then, at 18. So you've got it all the way through university. It's ready for when you start law school. You're not hanging around in debt, surviving off your parents. And then you scale down the salary at the other end. So you end up with the same money. And all you're really talking about at that point is a matter of administration. OK, so that might tackle finances. Let's go back a step further then, because I said that better grades might be the major issue underpinning the class ceiling. So we know from various research from the Sutton Trust that if you can tackle students as early as possible getting better grades, then you can have real results. So maybe we look at improving education or early years classes or even parenting classes for those bringing up underprivileged families. But that's just not going to be commercially viable. We certainly couldn't afford to tackle that sort of scale. So what we can do at that age, at that young age, is we can change aspiration. And aspiration is a really key area for social mobility because, as I said earlier, 7 out of 8 people from low-income families just say flat out from the beginning, professions aren't for me. That's not where I'm going. And they don't even consider it. So they're marginalised straight away. Now, there are 3 key ways that you can go about changing aspirations. One of them is mentoring. The other is adequate careers advice. And the third is work experience programs so that students can relate directly to what they're looking to go into. Now, mentoring has proved to be hugely successful with the Sutton Trust, and obviously it gives students individual access to one person, so that can be really helpful. But the problem with that individual access to every student who might be on the gifted and talented programme, or every student who's showing some potential for law, well, that's going to be a huge amount of human resources and a huge amount of money. And I know that it's going to create a serious funding thing if we're going to think only about mentoring. So let's move to something that might be more feasible, that might be more commercially viable, and that is careers advice. Because 14 to 16-year-olds, 50% of them, according to the I Could survey, say that their careers advice is either non-existent or very, very poor. Now, at 14 to 16, this is a key age when people are choosing their GCSEs and shaping their futures. What I propose is that the Law Society works in conjunction with chambers and with law firms to develop a comprehensive and user-friendly either video or DVD. Something where you don't need a huge network of experienced people giving information. Something as simple as putting it on and pressing play. And that way, if you gave that to every single state school and every single private school, you would at least get the information out to people. Because freedom of information is the start of equality. If people understand what's going on, they stand a chance of working their way forwards towards it. The third thing that I mentioned is work experience. Now, Alanna and Overy have got a Smart Start experience they've just started, where they took on 100 students from inner city London state schools and showed them what it was like to do 2 weeks in a law firm. Because the problem with work experience at the moment is that it's targeted at people who are doing the second year of their university at the very earliest, and often they're not getting on vacation schemes until they're on their GDL or their LPC or their BVC. So mini pupilages as well as VAC schemes are simply reaching people when the class ceiling has already been established. What I would propose again is that the Law Society takes the lead on this and gets the law firms and chambers to all agree a certain number of places available for those younger people, for 16-year-olds, and gets them involved, even if it's just for a week. The idea of this is not just a mad recruitment drive to get everybody to do law, because what we want to ensure is that law isn't the default job of everybody. We have to make sure that people have informed choices. And I think that work experience gives that. So if we follow this programme, we would certainly have the tangible benefits I outlined at the beginning. We would have that greater pool of talent. We would have the committed students and the diverse business profile. And what we need to do to achieve this is either by adopting solutions like these or ones similar. To break the class ceiling, we have to start earlier, start at the school gates and shake it at its foundations. And the thing to remember about all of this is that breaking the class ceiling shouldn't be about charity. It's not about handouts. Breaking the class ceiling should be about investment. Because if we make real changes and get in real talent, then breaking the class ceiling isn't just about looking at the interests of people who are currently excluded. It actually becomes improving the interests of law firms, of chambers, and inevitably helping our bottom line itself. Thank you.
Can I ask a question? You talked about bringing the money earlier into the process,
yes.
For example, at the age 18. But how would you propose identifying talent at that stage, rather than, for example, at the end of a 3-year degree when people may be more intellectually or academically mature?
I think you would have to tailor your essentially your recruitment drive, as it currently is, to look at how much potential somebody has got at 18. But it's the same idea, really, is getting sort of application forms. Maybe, you know, if you have any careers sort of fair throughout the country, the Army's there every time. So there's no reason why the Law Society couldn't be there every time saying, you know, at least be interested and asking people to apply. And at that point, you could go about assessing them. You know, I suppose you would take the lead from the sort of criteria that universities are looking for with the sort of intellectual abilities they expect from somebody at that age and work with that. And obviously that would take a little bit of doing. But I think that if you had that option, you could actually attract a much larger market, because there's about 35,000 people who get good enough A-levels to go to university and don't go. Much of that's finance related.
But if the money's coming from the firms and sets of chambers, they're making the investment to pick
Yes.
up your work. They will need to be confident that they, rather like Dragon's Den, that the investment is worthwhile. Mm-hmm. So you can talk of law fairs and attending at law fairs, but how are they going to judge that quality at that stage?
I think, you know, there is going to be an element of looking at the intelligence of the person. I don't want to say necessarily go on grades, because I've mentioned the problem with that. I think you're going to try to ascertain how somebody's soft skills are. You're also going to be looking maybe for reports from their tutors about their level of commitment, because you are talking, I appreciate, about somebody being ready to do a job in 5 years' time or 4 years' time. You'd also be wanting somebody, I think if you were going to make that investment, you'd be asking people to take law as their degree course to show some commitment to that point. But I think people at 18 do enter into employment contracts and they do enter into other training contracts. Although it seems a bit radical, there's no reason why that couldn't be made available to the law as well.
Are you suggesting they start their training contract at the same time as their degree?
No, I'm sorry if that wasn't clear. What I would mean is that you're just getting the money to them earlier. So the same process of university, law school, and then training contract begins.
It doesn't mean the law firms like Herbert Smith would have to increase. If you're saying, well, they're going to pay for the undergraduate stage and the vocational stage, that's quite a commitment.
Yes, but I wouldn't be suggesting that they spend more money in total. So say if the full amount that Herbert Smith were to allocate to trainees was 100,000 over, the 2 years and sponsoring their LPC or whatever, you still offer the same money. What you'd do is you would grade it effectively, so that they would get a small amount first year, second year, third year, and then their salary
would have to make up the difference.
No, yes, you would. The salary would decrease. So I mean, it's not going to be perfect if you've got money.
It's almost like a legal services student loan scheme in part. And as you're saying, well, we'll pay up front, but then we're going to take a deduction from your salary as you move into practice.
It's a similar idea, but I think what you'd get then is you have the added security of knowing that you've got a job at the end of it, which is quite different to a student loan, where you're taking on a huge amount of money, a huge amount of debt, without any security at the end. And if you're from a very poor background, or even an average income background, that is going to put you off taking the university course in the first place. So if you know there's something solid at the other end, that is going to, I think, alleviate some financial worries.
Thank you. Now I'm going to draw a line again with the questioning because of time, but thank you very much.
Thank you.